When my wife Sarah and I purchased our dream home in Paradise Falls 3 years ago, we thought we'd found the perfect place to raise our two daughters. The neighborhood boasted immaculately landscaped common areas, a community pool that sparkled in the sunlight, and homes with pristine facades that looked like they belonged in an architectural magazine. The HOA fees were steep, $450 monthly, but the amenities and the promise of property value protection seemed worth it. "You're going to love it here," gushed our realtor as she handed us the keys. Paradise Falls has won Best Maintained Community 4 years running. What she conveniently glossed over was that Paradise Falls HOA was run with an iron fist by Victoria Harrington, a former corporate lawyer who'd retired early after a lucrative career and now channeled her type of personality into micromanaging every aspect of our community. I first met Victoria at the mandatory new homeowner orientation. She was in her early 60s, impeccably dressed in a tailored pantsuit, her silver bob cut perfectly symmetrical, not a hair out of place. She smiled at me, but it didn't reach her eyes, which remained cold and calculating as she handed me a 3-ring binder nearly 3 inches thick. "Our complete community guidelines," she said. "I suggest you familiarize yourself thoroughly. Ignorance of the rules is not an excuse for breaking them." I nodded politely, thinking she was just being thorough. I didn't realize it was actually a threat. The first month passed without incident. We painted our interior walls, installed new kitchen countertops, and began to feel at home. Then the first letter arrived, an official warning printed on Paradise Falls HOA letterhead, complete with a photo stapled to it. Violation: unauthorized yard ornament. Reference code 7.123. The photo showed my 7-year-old daughter's birthday present, a small fairy garden she'd set up beside our front porch. It consisted of a tiny fairy house, some miniature furniture, and colorful pebbles arranged in a circle no larger than 2 feet in diameter. I immediately consulted the binder and found code 7.123. No lawn ornaments, figurines, decorative structures, or non-vegetation items may be placed in front yards without prior written approval from the Architectural Review Committee. I sighed but decided it wasn't worth fighting. That evening, I helped my daughter relocate her fairy garden to the backyard, explaining that those were the rules we agreed to when moving here. She was disappointed but understood. The next week, another notice arrived. Violation: unapproved window coverings. Reference code 9.82. This time, the photo showed the interior of our master bedroom, visible through the window. We had installed temporary paper blinds while waiting for our custom drapes to arrive. I felt a chill run down my spine. Someone had been peering into our bedroom and taking photos. I immediately called the HOA office and asked to speak with Victoria. "Mrs. Harrington is extremely busy," said the receptionist, a young woman whose voice carried a note of fear. "But I can schedule you for next Tuesday at 4:15 p.m. "This can't wait," I insisted. "Someone from your office has been taking photos through my bedroom window. That's invasion of privacy." "Our compliance officer takes all violation documentation from public property only," the receptionist recited as if reading from a script. "If you'd like to dispute the violation, you can submit Form 22B and attend the next board meeting to present your case." I reluctantly agreed to the Tuesday appointment, but by the weekend, a third notice had arrived. Violation: unauthorized vehicle in driveway. Reference code 12.57. The photo showed my brother-in-law's pickup truck, which had been parked in our driveway for exactly 3 hours while he helped us move a new dining table. That's when I realized this wasn't random bad luck. Victoria Harrington was watching us, and for some reason she had made us her target. Little did I know then that this was just the beginning of a battle that would consume the next 2 years of my life and change Paradise Falls forever. My Tuesday meeting with Victoria Harrington went exactly as you might expect, badly. Her office was a shrine to control, every pencil aligned, every paper stacked at perfect right angles. A wall of filing cabinets lined one side, each labeled with street names from our community. On her desk sat 3 monitors displaying what appeared to be security camera feeds from around the neighborhood. "Mr. Reynolds," she said without looking up from her computer, I understand you have concerns about our compliance procedures. Yes, I do, I replied, working to keep my voice level. 3 violations in our first month seems excessive, especially when one involved photographing the interior of our home. Victoria finally looked at me, her expression a mask of practiced neutrality. The HOA has a duty to maintain community standards. Your temporary window coverings are visible from the street and violate our aesthetic guidelines. We're waiting for back-ordered custom drapes. They'll be here in 2 weeks. Then you should have waited to move in until your home was properly outfitted. She said this as if it were the most reasonable conclusion in the world. That's not realistic, and you know it, I countered. Victoria's smile tightened. Mr. Reynolds, when you purchased in Paradise Falls, you agreed to abide by our covenants. If you found them too restrictive, perhaps you should have chosen another community. I took a deep breath. Look, we're trying our best to comply, but my daughter was upset about her fairy garden, and frankly, I'm concerned about someone photographing our bedroom. Our compliance officer follows strict protocols, she said dismissively. Now about your brother-in-law's truck. Commercial vehicles are expressly prohibited in driveways. It was there for 3 hours while he helped move furniture. The guidelines don't specify duration. A violation is a violation. She slid a form across her desk. This is your payment notice for the 3 infractions. $150 for the fairy garden, $200 for the window coverings, and $250 for the vehicle. $600 total, due within 30 days. I stared at the paper in disbelief. $600? That's ridiculous. The fee schedule is clearly outlined in Section 4 of your homeowner packet, Victoria replied coolly. Additionally, continued violations will result in escalating penalties. I wanted to argue further, but something in her expression told me it would be futile. I took the invoice and left, seething with frustration. That evening, Sarah and I discussed our options over dinner. We could fight it, she suggested. Attend the board meeting, make our case. From what I've heard, Victoria controls the board completely, I replied. 5 members, and 3 are her close friends. The other 2 never oppose her. Then we pay this time and just make sure we don't violate any more rules, Sarah said practically. I nodded, though something felt wrong about capitulating. Still, for the sake of peace, we paid the fine and doubled our efforts to comply with every guideline in that massive binder. For about 2 weeks, things were quiet. Then our next-door neighbor, Eleanor, an elderly widow who lived in Paradise Falls for 15 years, knocked on our door in tears. They're fining me $1,000 because my roses are the wrong shade of red, she sobbed. Victoria says they're salmon pink, not classic red, as approved in my garden plan. I planted these roses when my husband was still alive. They've been here for a decade with no complaints. I invited Eleanor in, made her tea, and examined the violation notice. Sure enough, it cited unapproved color variation and perennial plantings. The fine was indeed $1,000, with a notice that the roses must be removed within 14 days or additional penalties would accrue. This is insane, I told Eleanor. These are living plants. Colors can vary slightly from year to year. Victoria knows that, Eleanor whispered, looking around as if afraid of being overheard. She's doing this because I voted against her proposal to increase HOA fees last month. I'm on a fixed income. I can't afford higher fees. Now she's punishing me. That's when I realized this wasn't just about strict rule enforcement. Victoria was using the HOA as a weapon against anyone who crossed her. The next day, I received our 4th violation notice. Improper garbage bin placement. Bin must be positioned exactly 3 feet from curb. Your bin was measured at 2 feet, 8 inches. Fine, $200. The attached photo showed someone actually measuring the distance with a tape measure. This wasn't just petty. It was personal. Victoria Harrington had declared war, and for some reason, she decided to make an example of us. I paid Eleanor's fine anonymously and helped her replant her garden with approved roses. Then I wrote the check for our garbage bin violation. But as I dropped that envelope in the mail, I made a decision. This would be the last time Victoria Harrington would bully me into submission. I didn't know how yet, but I was going to fight back. By our third month in Paradise Falls, the pattern was clear. Every week brought new violation notices for increasingly trivial infractions. Holiday decorations displayed one day before approved seasonal window, $300, non-regulation mailbox flag, brass instead of black, $150, unapproved bird feeder visible from street, $250. Each time I contested a violation, Victoria found a way to twist the regulations against me. When I removed the bird feeder, she sent a violation for debris on lawn because a few seeds had fallen on the grass. When I painted our mailbox flag black, she claimed the shade wasn't the approved matte black, but rather semi-gloss black. Our monthly HOA dues of $450 had effectively doubled with fines, and our savings were dwindling fast. This can't continue, Daniel, Sarah said one night after we received yet another notice. We've paid over $2,000 in fines already. At this rate, we'll have to dip into the girls' college funds just to keep up. I nodded grimly. I'm going to the next board meeting. We can't be the only ones experiencing this. The following Tuesday, I arrived at the community center for the monthly HOA meeting. To my surprise, the room was packed. Clearly, others had reached their breaking point too. Eleanor waved me over to a seat she'd saved. I've been talking to neighbors, she whispered. Victoria's targeting at least a dozen households with these ridiculous fines. As the meeting commenced, Victoria sat at the center of the board table, flanked by her loyal supporters, Margaret Wilson, a retired school principal who nodded at everything Victoria said, Robert Chen, a corporate executive who barely looked up from his phone, Louise Baker, Victoria's tennis partner, and Thomas Wright, the newest board member, who looked uncomfortable with the proceedings but remained silent. When the floor opened for homeowner comments, hands shot up across the room. Victoria recognized each person with obvious reluctance. My son's basketball hoop was approved 3 years ago, and now you're telling me it's suddenly against regulations, demanded one father. The guidelines were updated last quarter, Victoria replied smoothly. All exterior recreational equipment must now be removed daily when not in active use. That's not practical for a mounted basketball hoop. Then I suggest you find an alternative form of recreation that complies with our standards. One by one, homeowners aired their grievances, and one by one, Victoria dismissed them with references to obscure bylaw changes or interpretations of vague regulations. When my turn came, I decided on a different approach. I've reviewed our HOA's financial statements for the past 3 years. I began having done my homework, and I noticed that fine revenue has increased 340% since Mrs. Harrington became president, while actual community improvements have decreased by 28%. I'm curious about where that money is going. The room fell silent. Victoria's eyes narrowed dangerously. Our financial allocations are fully transparent and approved by the board, she said coldly. If you had questions about the budget, the proper channel would have been to submit them in writing before the meeting. I'm submitting them now, I pressed, and I'd like to know specifically why the landscaping budget was cut by $30,000 while administrative expenses increased by almost the same amount. Robert Chen finally looked up from his phone. Thomas Wright shifted uncomfortably in his seat. That's quite enough, Mr. Reynolds, Victoria snapped. If you wish to review our financial records, you may submit a formal request and pay the $150 administrative fee for document preparation. As murmurs spread through the audience, Victoria abruptly moved to adjourn the meeting, cutting off several homeowners who hadn't yet spoken. Outside in the parking lot, a small group gathered around me. You hit the nail on the head about the finances, said James Peterson, an accountant who lived on Magnolia Drive. I've been tracking the numbers too. Something's definitely off. She's been finding people to fund her own salary increase, Eleanor added. The board voted to increase the management stipend last year from $5,000 to $35,000 annually. That can't be legal, I said. It's in a gray area, replied Michael Gomes, a lawyer who lived across the street from us. HOAs have broad powers in Texas, but there are limits, and I think Victoria is exceeding them. We agreed to meet the following weekend to compare notes and discuss strategy. For the first time since moving to Paradise Falls, I felt like we weren't alone in this fight. 3 days later, I arrived home to find a certified letter in our mailbox. Inside was a formal notice: violation, unauthorized gathering in residential property exceeding noise and occupancy limitations. Fine, $1,500. Additional penalties will be assessed for any similar violations. Attached was a photo of our backyard barbecue from the previous weekend. Just our family and the neighbors on either side of us, a total of 9 people. At the bottom, a handwritten note in Victoria's precise script. Perhaps you should focus more on following rules than stirring up trouble, Mr. Reynolds. The message was clear. She was watching us, she knew about our planned meeting, and she was escalating her tactics. That night, as Sarah and I discussed our options, headlights swept across our living room wall. Through the window, I spotted a Paradise Falls security vehicle moving slowly past our house for the 3rd time that evening. We were being monitored. The question was, how far would Victoria go to maintain her control? The weeks that followed felt like living under surveillance in a gilded prison. Despite the intimidation, our small resistance group continued to meet, but we became more careful, gathering at a coffee shop outside the neighborhood or in Michael Gomez's law office downtown. Our investigation revealed troubling patterns. Victoria had systematically changed HOA bylaws through procedural loopholes, often holding votes during holiday weekends when few residents attended meetings. She had installed friends as committee chairs and contracted HOA services to companies with suspicious connections to board members. Most concerning was the compliance officer, a former police officer named Rick Dawson, who'd been dismissed from the force for excessive force allegations. Victoria had hired him at an exorbitant salary to patrol Paradise Falls and document violations. He drove a vehicle marked Paradise Falls Security and carried himself with the authority of actual law enforcement, though he had no legal power beyond reporting covenant violations. Despite mounting evidence of misconduct, we struggled to find a clear path forward. Victoria had carefully constructed her power base, and Texas law gave HOAs considerable latitude. Then came the incident that changed everything. It was my youngest daughter Lily's 8th birthday, and we'd planned a modest celebration in our backyard, just family and 4 of her closest friends. We were careful to end by 7:00 p.m. to comply with noise ordinances, and kept decorations minimal and out of street view. As the party was winding down, my brother-in-law arrived with Lily's gift, a beautiful handcrafted playhouse he'd spent months building in his workshop. It was small, just big enough for Lily and perhaps one friend, painted white with purple trim to match her bedroom colors. The delight on her face when she saw it was something I'll never forget. "Can we set it up now, Daddy? Please?" she begged, her eyes shining with excitement. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We positioned it in a corner of the backyard, partially concealed by a large oak tree and well away from any sight lines from the street. Lily and her friends played in it until dusk, their laughter the sweetest sound I'd heard in months. The next morning, as we were having breakfast, loud pounding on our front door startled us. I opened it to find Rick Dawson, Victoria's compliance officer, scowling at me with a clipboard in hand. "Unauthorized permanent structure," he barked, thrusting a violation notice at me. "Section 11.34. No accessory buildings, sheds, or freestanding structures may be erected without prior written approval from the Architectural Review Committee. It's a playhouse," I explained, trying to remain calm. "It's not permanent. It's an unauthorized structure," he interrupted. "Fine is $2,500, and you have 24 hours to remove it." $2,500? That's outrageous, I protested. Additionally, he continued as if I hadn't spoken, "You've incurred a separate violation for holding an unauthorized gathering yesterday. That's another $1,500. It was a child's birthday party with 6 kids total. Events exceeding 4 non-resident guests require prior approval and payment of the community center usage fee, regardless of location." I was speechless with anger. Behind me, I could feel Sarah tensing, ready to intervene if I lost my temper. You have 24 hours to remove the structure and 30 days to pay both fines, Dawson repeated. Failure to comply will result in additional penalties and possible lien proceedings. As he turned to leave, he paused. Oh, and Mrs. Harrington wanted me to remind you that continued troublemaking could result in the board pursuing all available remedies, including foreclosure for non-compliance. The threat hung in the air between us. Foreclosure. They were threatening to take our home because of a child's playhouse. After he left, I found Lily sitting on the stairs, tears streaming down her face. She'd heard everything. Are they going to take my playhouse, Daddy? Are they going to take our house? I knelt beside her, my heart breaking. No, sweetheart, I won't let that happen. That afternoon, I helped my brother-in-law dismantle the playhouse and load it into his truck. Lily watched from the window, inconsolable. When the job was done, I found Sarah in our bedroom, methodically folding laundry with the tight, controlled movements that indicated she was barely holding it together. We can't stay here, she said quietly. These people are toxic. No home is worth this. I sat beside her on the bed. If we sell now, we'll take a loss. The housing market's down, and we've barely built any equity. I don't care, she replied. Our children are miserable. We're miserable. It's affecting our health, our happiness, our marriage. She was right. The constant stress had taken its toll on all of us. I'd been having trouble sleeping. Sarah's migraines had returned, and both girls were showing signs of anxiety. Okay, I agreed. We'll start looking for another place. That evening, I received an email notification that the HOA had placed a lien on our property for unpaid fines and assessments totaling $4,000. They hadn't even waited the 30 days they promised. Something inside me snapped. This wasn't just about rule enforcement anymore. It was about power, control, and bullying. Victoria Harrington wasn't just making our lives difficult. She was threatening our financial future, our home, and our family's well-being. I called Michael Gomes immediately. They'd filed a lien already, I told him. They're not even following their own procedures. That's actually good news, Michael replied, surprising me. It means they're getting sloppy. When bullies feel threatened, they overreach, and when they overreach, they make mistakes. What kind of mistakes? The kind that give us legal leverage, he said. Daniel, I've been doing some digging into Victoria's background. There's something not right about how Paradise Falls has been run for the past 5 years. I think it's time we stop playing defense and start playing offense. For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps there was a way to fight back after all. Whatever it takes, I said firmly. I'm done being pushed around. This ends now. The next morning, I called in sick to work, something I rarely did, and met Michael at his downtown law office. His conference room walls were covered with documents, financial statements, board meeting minutes, property records, and a complex diagram that resembled a corporate structure chart. What am I looking at? I asked. 5 years of Paradise Falls HOA history, Michael replied, handing me a cup of coffee, and what appears to be a sophisticated scheme to siphon homeowner funds into private pockets. He pointed to the diagram. Victoria Harrington doesn't just run the HOA. She's connected to almost every vendor the association contracts with. The landscaping company, owned by her brother-in-law, the property management firm. Her daughter is the silent majority partner. The security company employing Rick Dawson, registered to an LLC that traces back to Victoria's husband. I stared at the connections he mapped out. That's a conflict of interest. It's worse than that, Michael said grimly. It's likely fraud. They've been using the HOA as a personal piggy bank. Can we prove it? Not yet, but we're close. James has been analyzing the financial statements, and there are clear discrepancies. Money allocated for community improvements has been diverted to these companies at inflated rates. He handed me another document, a printout of Texas Property Code statutes relating to HOAs. The law requires financial transparency and prohibits board members from profiting from their positions without full disclosure and recusal from relevant votes. Victoria has done neither. So we can report her to the authorities. Michael shook his head. Not yet. We need ironclad proof, and we need to be strategic. Victoria has friends in local government. That's how she's avoided scrutiny so far. Over the next 2 weeks, our small resistance group transformed into an investigative team. Eleanor, despite her age, turned out to have a talent for social engineering. She befriended the HOA office receptionist and gleaned valuable information about upcoming board actions. James meticulously documented financial irregularities. Michael researched legal precedents and prepared potential litigation strategies. I focused on building community support, moving carefully to avoid Victoria's surveillance. I began speaking one-on-one with other homeowners, sharing what we discovered and gauging their willingness to join our cause. Many were initially fearful, but became outraged when they understood how they'd been manipulated. Our breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Thomas Wright, the newest and quietest board member, contacted me after learning I'd been speaking with his neighbor. "I need to talk to you," he said quietly when I answered his call. "Not over the phone. Meet me at the coffee shop on Main Street in an hour." When I arrived, Thomas was already there, nervously checking his watch. He looked haggard with dark circles under his eyes. "I've been wanting to speak up for months," he confessed after I sat down. "But Victoria has something on everyone. In my case, she threatened to reveal an old DUI from my college days to my employer. I could lose my job." "That's blackmail," I said, shocked. "It's how she operates," Thomas replied. "But I can't be part of this anymore. What they're planning to do to you and the others who've been asking questions. It's unconscionable." He slid a USB drive across the table. Board emails, financial records, meeting minutes that were never publicly released. "There's enough here to prove what you suspect about the vendor relationships. But more importantly, there's evidence of their next move, which is," Thomas lowered his voice, "they're planning a special assessment, $15,000 per household, supposedly for infrastructure improvements. In reality, most of it will go to these sham companies, and for anyone who protests or can't pay immediately, they're preparing to fast-track foreclosure proceedings." I felt sick. They can't just take people's homes. In Texas, they can. HOA liens are powerful tools, and Victoria has a real estate investor friend ready to snap up the properties at below-market rates. They've done it before in other communities. This was bigger than I'd imagined, not just petty tyranny, but organized financial predation. "Why are you helping us?" I asked. Thomas looked down at his hands. "My parents lost their home to a predatory HOA when I was in high school. I joined the board thinking I could prevent that from happening here, but I've been a coward. It's time to make it right." Armed with Thomas's evidence, our team worked through the night, compiling a comprehensive case file. The picture that emerged was damning. For 5 years, Victoria and her accomplices had systematically exploited Paradise Falls residents, using intimidation, selective enforcement, and procedural manipulation to extract hundreds of thousands of dollars. The next morning, Michael and I drove to the county courthouse to meet with an assistant district attorney he knew. 3 hours later, we emerged with a plan and official support. When Victoria called an emergency board meeting the following evening to push through the special assessment, she had no idea what awaited her. The community center was packed. We'd made sure of that, quietly spreading word to every household in Paradise Falls. Victoria looked annoyed at the turnout but confident as she called the meeting to order. "The board has determined that essential infrastructure improvements cannot be delayed any longer," she began smoothly. "Therefore, we are implementing a special assessment of $15,000 per household, payable within 60 days. Murmurs of shock and anger rippled through the room. "Those unable to pay in full may arrange a payment plan with 12% interest," she continued. "Failure to comply will unfortunately result in lion proceedings as outlined in our bylaws." Before anyone could respond, the back doors opened. 2 county sheriff's deputies entered, followed by a woman in a business suit who I recognized from our courthouse meeting, Assistant District Attorney Anita Ramirez. Victoria faltered mid-sentence, her composure cracking for the first time. "Victoria Harrington," AVA Ramirez announced, her voice carrying through the now silent room. "I have a court order authorizing the immediate seizure of Paradise Falls Homeowners Association records and the suspension of all board activities pending investigation into allegations of fraud, embezzlement, and financial malfeasance. One of the deputies approached the board table with the warrant while the other moved to secure the room. Victoria's face drained of color. "This is outrageous. You can't just." "We can, and we are," Ramirez interrupted. "Additionally, we have orders to access all electronic records and accounts associated with the HOA and its vendors." She turned to address the stunned audience. "Homeowners of Paradise Falls, we have reason to believe your association has been operated in violation of Texas property codes and possibly criminal statutes. We ask for your patience during our investigation." As Victoria and the other board members were escorted from their seats, I caught her eye. The look of venomous hatred she gave me should have been frightening, but instead, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. The fight was far from over, but for the first time since moving to Paradise Falls, I felt like the scales of justice were finally beginning to balance. The weeks following the dramatic board meeting were a whirlwind of activity. County investigators descended on Paradise Falls, combing through records and interviewing residents. What they uncovered exceeded even our suspicions. Victoria's scheme went back nearly 7 years, beginning shortly after she moved to the community. She had methodically positioned herself as HOA president, then gradually replaced board members with allies. The financial web was complex: shell companies, inflated contracts, unauthorized transfers, and manipulated accounting that had siphoned over $1.2 million from homeowner funds. More disturbing were the human stories that emerged. 3 families had lost their homes to HOA-initiated foreclosures over relatively minor violations and fines. Homes that were subsequently purchased at auction by an investment company connected to Victoria's husband. Dozens more had paid thousands in questionable fines and assessments, many out of fear rather than legitimate violations. With the board suspended, the county appointed a temporary administrator to manage essential HOA functions. For the first time in years, there were no violation notices, no surveillance vehicles, no atmosphere of constant scrutiny. Paradise Falls began to feel like a neighborhood again rather than a prison camp. Just as we were beginning to relax, I received a call from AVA Ramirez. "We have a problem, Mr. Reynolds," she said without preamble. "Victoria Harrington made bail this morning, and her lawyer is good, very good. They're challenging our search warrants and the admissibility of the evidence." "How is that possible?" I asked, alarmed. "Thomas's documents clearly show." "Thomas Wright has recanted his statement," she interrupted grimly. "He claims you coerced him into providing those files and that he had no knowledge of their contents." I was stunned. "That's a complete lie. He came to us voluntarily." "I believe you, but it complicates our case. Without his testimony, we're relying heavily on the financial records themselves, which Victoria's team is arguing were obtained improperly." "So what happens now?" "We're proceeding with the case, but I need to prepare you. There's a possibility some charges might be reduced or dismissed, and Victoria is already working to reassert control over the HOA. After we hung up, I immediately called an emergency meeting of our core group. Over pizza in Michael's living room, I shared the troubling development. "Thomas was clearly threatened again," Eleanor said. "Poor man looked terrified at the board meeting when they were taking Victoria away." "The question is, what do we do now?" James asked. "If Victoria regains control of the HOA," he didn't need to finish the thought. "We all knew she would seek vengeance against everyone who had opposed her." Michael cleared his throat. "I've been researching an alternative approach. Rather than just plain defense, we could potentially take control of the situation ourselves." He spread a document on the coffee table, a copy of the Paradise Falls HOA's founding articles and bylaws. "There's a provision here that's never been utilized," he explained, pointing to a highlighted section. "If 2/3 of homeowners petition for dissolution and reorganization of the HOA, they can effectively reset the entire structure. New bylaws, new board, new everything." "Would that actually work?" I asked skeptically. "It's legally sound," Michael confirmed. "The challenge is getting that many homeowners to agree. We need 218 signatures out of the 327 homes in Paradise Falls." "That's a tall order," James commented. Many people are still afraid of Victoria, regardless of the investigation. Then we need to give them something more powerful than fear, I said, an idea forming. We need to show them a better alternative. Over the next 3 days, our team drafted a comprehensive plan for a reformed HOA, transparent finances with regular external audits, reasonable covenant enforcement with clear appeals processes, term limits for board members, and safeguards against conflicts of interest. We calculated that we could actually reduce monthly dues by eliminating the bloated contracts Victoria had established. With our proposal ready, we began a systematic campaign to reach every household in Paradise Falls. We divided the neighborhood into sectors, with each team member responsible for personal outreach in their assigned area. We created a secure online portal where homeowners could review our evidence and proposal, ask questions, and ultimately sign the petition electronically if they chose to support it. Progress was slow at first. Many residents were reluctant to get involved, fearing repercussions if Victoria returned to power. Others had grown so disillusioned with HOA politics that they wanted nothing to do with any faction. But gradually, as we shared our vision for a community governed by fairness rather than fear, signatures began to accumulate. Victoria, meanwhile, was not sitting idle. Though legally barred from entering the HOA office while under investigation, she held court from her home, summoning loyal supporters and pressuring wavering homeowners. Anonymous letters appeared in mailboxes warning of property value collapse and community deterioration if the radical elements, clearly meaning us, gained control. Rick Dawson, the former compliance officer, began driving through the neighborhood again, taking photos and making notes. An obvious intimidation tactic, though he no longer had any official capacity. The breaking point came during our 3rd week of campaigning. Eleanor called me in tears one evening. "Someone broke into my house," she sobbed. "Nothing's missing, but all my husband's photographs, the ones on the mantel, they'd been smashed. And there was a note. I drove to her house immediately. The note, left prominently on her kitchen table, was typed and unsigned. Drop the petition or next time we take more than pictures." "This has gone too far," I said, calling the police despite Eleanor's reluctance. "This isn't HOA politics anymore. It's criminal intimidation." Word of the break-in spread quickly through the neighborhood, but instead of frightening residents into submission as Victoria likely intended, it had the opposite effect. People were outraged. Homes that had declined our visits now called requesting information. Signatures on our petition surged as the community's fear transformed into anger. 3 days later, as we approached the 2/3 threshold needed for our petition, Victoria made her countermove. She called an informational meeting at her home for all Paradise Falls residents, a clear violation of the court order prohibiting her from conducting HOA business, but technically on private property so difficult to prevent. Our team debated whether to attend Victoria's meeting or to boycott it. In the end, we decided that someone needed to be there to counter her narrative. "I'll go," I volunteered. "Michael, you should come as legal backup." When we arrived at Victoria's sprawling colonial home, about 70 residents had already gathered in her expansive backyard. Security cameras mounted on the eaves tracked our movement as we found seats near the back. Victoria had transformed her patio into a makeshift stage, complete with a podium and projector screen. She looked immaculate as always, but there was a new brittleness to her composure, like porcelain about to crack. "Neighbors," she began, her voice carrying across the yard, "thank you for coming. Recent events have created confusion and concern in our community, and I felt it was important to address these matters directly." She clicked to her first slide, a graph showing property values in Paradise Falls compared to surrounding neighborhoods. "Under my leadership, our home values have increased 32% over the past 5 years, outperforming every comparable community in the county. This is the direct result of our stringent community standards and diligent enforcement." Murmurs of acknowledgement rippled through the crowd. Victoria was tapping into homeowners' primary concern, their investment. "The current investigation," she continued, her tone dismissive, "is based on misunderstandings and distortions perpetuated by a small group of residents who simply don't appreciate the work required to maintain our standards." She clicked to another slide showing chaos, Overgrown lawns, cars on blocks, garish decorations. This is what happens when HOAs fail to enforce covenants. Is this what you want Paradise Falls to become? The fear tactics were working. I could see uncertainty on many faces. Michael nudged me. "She's good," he whispered. "Time for plan B." I nodded slightly and stood up. Victoria faltered momentarily as she spotted me. "Mrs. Harrington," I said clearly, "may I ask a question about the financial data you're presenting?" Her eyes narrowed, but with so many witnesses, she could hardly refuse. Briefly, she conceded. Instead of speaking further, I walked forward and connected my laptop to her projector, switching the input before she could object. "What are you doing?" She hissed as my screen replaced hers. Providing context, I replied calmly, then addressed the crowd. "Neighbors, what Mrs. Harrington isn't telling you is where your money has actually been going." I displayed the first of our carefully prepared slides, a breakdown of HOA vendor contracts with owners' names highlighted. The landscaping company that received $280,000 last year, owned by Victoria's brother-in-law. The property management firm billing us $12,000 monthly, her daughter's company. The security service traces back to her husband. Gasps and murmurs spread through the audience. Victoria lunged for my laptop, but Michael stepped between us. "These are documented facts," I continued, advancing to the next slide. "And here's what we've all been paying for." The screen showed photos of Victoria's recently purchased vacation home in Aspen, her husband's new yacht, her daughter's Manhattan apartment, all acquired during the period when Paradise Falls vendor contracts had ballooned. "You're slandering me," Victoria sputtered, face flushed with rage. "This is completely inappropriate. Everything I'm showing is public record," I replied, just like the court documents detailing how 3 of our former neighbors lost their homes through HOA foreclosures, homes that were purchased at fraction of their value by Harrington Family Investments. The mood in the yard had shifted dramatically. Where there had been uncertainty, now there was anger. Victoria must have sensed it too, because she abruptly changed tactics. Even if there were some administrative oversights, she said, forcing a conciliatory tone, "the fact remains that I've protected your property values. These people pushing for changes will destroy everything we've built." "Actually," came a new voice from the crowd, "we have a different vision." Eleanor stood, poised despite her age, and walked to join me. One by one, other members of our team rose and came forward until we formed a united front. "We believe in a community governed by transparency and fairness," Eleanor said, "where rules exist to enhance our neighborhood, not to punish or profit from homeowners." James stepped forward with copies of our proposal, which we began distributing through the crowd. "Our petition has already gathered 205 signatures," he announced. "Just 13 more, and we can legally dissolve the current HOA structure and create a new one, with full financial transparency, reasonable enforcement, and term limits to prevent any future abuses of power." Victoria's composure finally shattered. "This is a coup," she shouted. "You have no right to hijack my meeting." "It's not your meeting, Victoria," Eleanor said firmly. "It's not your HOA either. It belongs to all of us, and we're taking it back." As we left Victoria's property that evening, we were surrounded by neighbors asking to sign our petition. By midnight, we had 241 signatures, well beyond the 2/3 majority required. The house of cards Victoria had built so carefully was collapsing, one signature at a time. The county court scheduled a hearing to address our petition for HOA dissolution and reorganization. Given the ongoing criminal investigation, the judge fast-tracked our case, setting a date just 2 weeks out. During those 14 days, Paradise Falls transformed. Neighbors who had previously avoided eye contact now greeted each other warmly. Spontaneous block parties emerged. Children played freely in front yards without parents anxiously checking for compliance officers. But beneath this newfound community spirit, tension simmered. Victoria and her allies weren't surrendering without a fight. They hired Preston Wallace, the most expensive real estate attorney in the state, and filed motions challenging the validity of our petition on technical grounds. They're claiming our electronic signatures don't meet statutory requirements, Michael explained after reviewing their filings. It's a stretch, but not entirely baseless. Texas law has some ambiguity about electronic signatures in this specific context. So we could lose on a technicality. I asked, dismayed. It's possible, he admitted. Wallace is requesting the judge throw out all electronic signatures, which would drop us below the 2/3 threshold. Our team worked frantically to gather physical signatures as backup, but many residents had left for summer vacations, making it difficult to reach everyone who had signed electronically. 3 days before the hearing, Victoria played her final card. A formal notice arrived at every home in Paradise Falls, emergency assessment notice. Due to unexpected legal expenses and operational shortfalls, the Paradise Falls HOA board, currently operating through delegated authority, has approved an emergency assessment of $5,000 per household, due within 30 days. Failure to pay will result in immediate lien proceedings. Though the board was technically suspended, Victoria's lawyer had exploited a loophole allowing essential operations to continue under delegated authority. The assessment was a blatant intimidation tactic, a reminder of the power she still wielded. "She's trying to scare people away from supporting us," Eleanor observed when we gathered to discuss this latest development. "And it might work. $5,000 is a lot of money for many families. Can she actually enforce this assessment?" I asked Michael. "Legally? It's questionable at best. But by the time it's resolved in court, the damage would be done. She's counting on fear, not legal authority." I thought for a moment. What if we counter with absolute certainty? Promise homeowners they won't have to pay if they stand with us. "We can't make that guarantee," Michael cautioned. "If we lose the hearing, then I'll cover it," I said firmly. Everyone stared at me. "Daniel, that could be over $1 million, James pointed out. "I know, but I believe we're going to win. And if we don't," I took a deep breath. "I've spoken with Sarah. We're prepared to take that risk." The truth was, we weren't exactly prepared. Covering every household's assessment would deplete our life savings and more. But sometimes principles demand sacrifices, and this felt like one of those moments. Word of my commitment spread through the neighborhood, countering Victoria's fear campaign with renewed hope. By the day of the hearing, our support had solidified once again. The county courthouse was packed when the case was called. Our side filled half the gallery, a sea of Paradise Falls residents and a show of solidarity. Victoria sat at the opposite table with her lawyer and remaining allies, her posture rigid with determination. Judge Marissa Chen, known for her no-nonsense approach, studied both parties carefully before speaking. "I've reviewed the extensive filings in this matter," she began. "Before addressing the technical arguments, I want to be clear. This court takes homeowner rights very seriously. HOAs serve an important function, but they must operate within legal and ethical boundaries." Preston Wallace rose smoothly. "Your Honor, while the petitioner's concerns may be valid, the law requires strict adherence to procedural requirements. The electronic signature method they employ does not meet the standard established in Section 209.00593 of the Property Code, which requires—" "I'm familiar with the statute, Mr. Wallace," Judge Chen interrupted. "I'm also familiar with the Texas Uniform Electronic Transactions Act, which your argument conveniently ignores." Wallace faltered slightly but pressed on. "Even under UETA, Your Honor, there must be reliable authentication methods. The petitioner's online portal lacks sufficient verification protocols." Michael stood. "Your Honor, our portal required homeowner account verification through property tax ID numbers and personal identifiers. We have affidavits from our technical team detailing the security measures taken. Additionally, we've since obtained physical signatures from 197 homeowners, still above the required threshold." Judge Chen nodded thoughtfully. "Mr. Wallace, does your client dispute the authenticity of these physical signatures?" "No, Your Honor, but we contest their relevance. The original petition was submitted with electronic signatures, which we believe were invalid at that time. Subsequent signatures cannot retroactively validate an invalid petition." The legal tennis match continued for nearly 2 hours, with technical arguments flying back and forth. Judge Chen listened attentively, occasionally asking pointed questions that revealed her thorough understanding of both property law and HOA regulations. Finally, she called for a brief recess to consider her ruling. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as we waited. When Judge Chen returned, her expression gave nothing away. After careful consideration of the arguments presented, I am prepared to rule on the petition for dissolution and reorganization of the Paradise Falls Homeowners Association. The courtroom fell silent. While I appreciate the technical nuances of Mr. Wallace's argument regarding electronic signatures, I find that the petitioners substantially complied with statutory requirements. Moreover, the subsequent physical signatures remove any doubt about homeowner intent. Victoria's face drained of color as the judge continued. Therefore, I am granting the petition for dissolution of the current HOA structure. The temporary administrator appointed by the county will oversee transition to a new board, to be elected within 60 days. Relief washed through me, but Judge Chen wasn't finished. Additionally, in light of the ongoing criminal investigation and evidence presented today, I am issuing an injunction against any assessment or enforcement action by the former board or its delegates pending complete reorganization. She fixed Victoria with a stern look. This court will not permit what appears to be retaliatory financial measures against homeowners exercising their legal rights. The recent emergency assessment is hereby invalidated. Victoria leaped to her feet. Your Honor, you can't. Mrs. Harrington, Judge Chen cut her off sharply. I strongly advise you not to finish that sentence. My ruling is final, and I remind you that you remain under investigation for serious allegations. Further actions that could be construed as homeowner harassment may result in additional legal consequences. Victoria sank back into her seat, defeat etched across her face. As we filed out of the courtroom, neighbors embraced and congratulated each other. The long nightmare of Victoria's reign was finally ending. But as we celebrated on the courthouse steps, I noticed Victoria watching me from her car across the street. The look in her eyes wasn't just anger. It was hatred, pure and personal. Despite our victory, I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't done fighting yet. I was right. 1 month after the court hearing, Paradise Falls held elections for the new HOA board. The turnout was unprecedented. Over 90% of homeowners participated, a stark contrast to the typical 15% during Victoria's era. Our reformed slate of candidates won in a landslide. Eleanor was elected president, with James as treasurer, Michael as legal counsel, and myself as vice president. We implemented our promised changes immediately: transparent finances, reasonable enforcement, term limits, and a new community-first philosophy. Monthly dues were reduced by 30% once we terminated the inflated vendor contracts. The compliance officer position was eliminated, replaced by a rotating community committee that approached rule enforcement as neighborly reminders rather than punitive actions. We instituted a 3 warnings policy before any fine could be assessed and created a transparent appeals process. The atmosphere in Paradise Falls transformed dramatically. Neighbors held impromptu gatherings without fear of unauthorized event violations. Children's playsets and basketball hoops reappeared in yards. Gardens flourished with diverse plantings no longer restricted to an approved palette of species and colors. Victoria, meanwhile, kept a low profile. The criminal investigation was proceeding slowly but methodically. She'd been indicted on multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and financial malfeasance, but her high-priced legal team had secured delay after delay. She remained in her home, rarely venturing out except for legal appointments. I occasionally glimpsed her watching from her window as I passed, her expression unreadable behind the glass. Despite our victory, I couldn't help feeling uneasy about her continued presence in the community. You're overthinking it, Sarah assured me one evening as we enjoyed dinner on our patio. Something we'd never dared do under the old regime for fear of outdoor dining violations. Victoria's finished, she continued. Her reputation is destroyed, her power structure dismantled. Even if she somehow avoids prison, she'll never regain control here. I wanted to believe her, but something nagged at me, an intuition that we'd overlooked something important. 2 days later, I discovered what it was. James called an emergency board meeting, his voice tense over the phone. We need to talk immediately. I found something in the financial records. We gathered in the community center, now a welcoming space with comfortable furniture and free coffee, rather than the sterile, intimidating environment Victoria had maintained. James spread several documents across the table. "I've been doing a complete audit of HOA finances for the past 7 years," he explained, "and I found this." He pointed to a line item repeated across multiple years. Property Acquisition Fund, $50,000 annual allocation. "What property acquisition?" Eleanor asked, confused. "The HOA doesn't buy property." "Exactly," James replied grimly, "but over 7 years, $350,000 was transferred to this fund. The money went to an LLC called Paradise Holdings, which I've traced to Victoria's husband." Michael frowned. "What would they need an acquisition fund for? The HOA already owns all the common areas." A chill ran down my spine as the pieces suddenly connected. "Not all of them," I said quietly. I pulled up the Paradise Falls property plat on my laptop and pointed to a central parcel. The main entrance, including the gatehouse, the fountain, and the first 100 yards of the boulevard. It's technically a separate parcel from the rest of the common areas. James nodded grimly. "And according to county records, Paradise Holdings purchased it 3 years ago from the original developer. The HOA has been paying them $5,000 monthly for an access easement." We sat in stunned silence as the implications sank in. "She controls the entrance to our neighborhood," Eleanor finally said. "Even after everything, she still holds that power over us." "There's more," James continued. "That monthly payment? It's set to increase to $15,000 next month under the terms of the easement agreement Victoria signed on behalf of the HOA. "Can they do that?" I asked Michael. "Unfortunately, yes," he replied after reviewing the documents. "The easement agreement is legally binding, even if it was entered into under questionable circumstances. We could challenge it in court, but that would take years," I finished his thought. "Meanwhile, we'd have to either pay their extortion or lose access to our own neighborhood." "There must be another way," Eleanor insisted. We spent hours brainstorming options, but each path seemed blocked. Legally purchasing the entrance parcel would cost millions, far beyond our reserves. Challenging the easement would be lengthy and uncertain. Building an alternative entrance would require acquiring adjacent property, securing permits, and major construction, also prohibitively expensive. I went home that night feeling defeated. After all we'd accomplished, Victoria still held the ultimate leverage, the literal gateway to our community. Unable to sleep, I wandered into my home office and began reviewing everything we knew about Victoria's operations. There had to be something we'd missed, some vulnerability in her seemingly perfect plan. Around 2 a.m., a notification popped up on my computer, an automatic reminder about the property tax deadline approaching. Something clicked in my mind. I immediately pulled up the county tax records for Paradise Holdings LLC and discovered exactly what I'd hoped. While Victoria had been meticulous about HOA matters, her personal business wasn't as carefully managed. Paradise Holdings was 3 years delinquent on property taxes for the entrance parcel. I called Michael immediately, despite the hour. "Tax foreclosure," I said when he answered groggily. "The county can foreclose for unpaid property taxes." By morning, our plan was in motion. Michael contacted the county tax office to confirm the delinquency and inquire about the foreclosure process. The amount owed with penalties and interest was approximately $58,000, substantial but not insurmountable. "The county will auction the property at the next tax sale," Michael explained when our board reconvened. "But here's the catch. Victoria will undoubtedly pay the taxes before then to prevent losing the property." "So we're back where we started," Eleanor sighed. "Not necessarily," I said, an idea forming. "What if we don't wait for the auction? What if we approach this differently?" Over the next week, I met secretly with a commercial real estate developer who owned property adjacent to Paradise Falls, a man who'd had his own conflicts with Victoria in the past. After extensive negotiations, we reached an agreement that seemed almost too perfect. When Victoria received the tax delinquency notice, her response was swift. Her lawyer contacted the county to arrange payment, only to discover the taxes had already been paid by an anonymous party. Under Texas law, this created a complex situation. The tax lien had been transferred to the paying party, who could eventually foreclose if not repaid with interest. Victoria would need to identify and reimburse this mystery benefactor or risk losing her leverage. Her lawyer filed emergency motions to discover who had paid the taxes. The court initially sided with her, until our developer friend revealed himself as the payer. "I have no obligation to accept repayment," he informed the court. "I'm content to hold the lien until the redemption period expires and then foreclose." Victoria was cornered. The redemption period would last 2 years, during which she'd receive no easement payments from the HOA. We'd established an escrow account instead, following Michael's legal advice. After that, she'd lose the property entirely. Her counteroffer came 3 days later. She would sell the entrance parcel to the HOA for $1.2 million, far above market value, but less than she'd extract through easement payments over time. We declined. Her next offer, $800,000. Again, we declined. As the standoff continued, an unexpected development shifted the balance further. The district attorney's office added new charges to Victoria's indictment based on evidence we'd uncovered about the Paradise Holdings transaction. Specifically, that she had used HOA funds to secretly acquire property that she then charged the HOA to access. Facing mounting legal jeopardy and dwindling options, Victoria finally capitulated. Through her lawyer, she offered to transfer the entrance parcel to the HOA in exchange for dropping our civil claims against her, though the criminal charges would proceed regardless. After careful consideration, we accepted. The property rightfully belonged to the community anyway, and ending the conflict decisively was worth foregoing potential civil damages. The final documents were signed on a sunny Tuesday morning in the community center. Victoria arrived with her lawyer but avoided eye contact with anyone. She looked smaller somehow, her imperious bearing diminished by defeat. As she turned to leave after the signing, I approached her. "It didn't have to be this way," I said quietly. "All we ever wanted was a fair community." She finally met my gaze, her eyes cold. "You have no idea what it takes to maintain standards in a place like this. Without me, this neighborhood will be just another declining suburb in 5 years." "I don't believe that," I replied. "There's a difference between maintaining standards and maintaining control. We've chosen the former." She gave a dismissive snort and walked away. 2 weeks later, a moving truck appeared at her house. By nightfall, she was gone, relocated, we later heard, to a gated community in Florida. The criminal case against Victoria and her accomplices proceeded without our direct involvement. Eventually, she accepted a plea deal. No prison time, but substantial financial penalties and permanent disqualification from serving on any HOA board. As for Paradise Falls, the transformation was remarkable. Under Eleanor's leadership, our community truly flourished. We maintained reasonable standards through education and cooperation rather than punishment. Property values continued to rise, proving Victoria's fear-mongering unfounded. Most importantly, Paradise Falls became what it should have been all along, a neighborhood in the truest sense, where people looked out for each other rather than reporting each other. The entrance parcel, once Victoria's final leverage, became the site of our most popular community improvement. A welcoming park with benches, flowering trees, and a playground where Lily's fairy garden inspired the design. 6 months after Victoria's departure, as I was helping set up for our first annual community picnic, held on the front lawns with no permits required, Eleanor approached me with a thick envelope. "This just arrived by courier," she said, handing it to me. "It's addressed to you personally." Inside was a property deed and a short note on expensive stationery. The deed transferred ownership of Victoria's former house to me personally, for the sum of $1. The note read simply, "The house is yours. The war is over." I showed it to Michael immediately, concerned it was some kind of trap. "It's legitimate," he confirmed after reviewing the documents. But why would she do this? The answer came in a second courier delivery the next day, a USB drive containing video files. They showed Victoria's husband and brother-in-law discussing plans to drain the HOA accounts completely before the court intervened. Victoria's voice could be heard objecting, arguing they should operate within certain boundaries. She wants us to know she wasn't the worst of them, Eleanor suggested when we viewed the recordings. It's her way of saving face, or ensuring her family takes the fall while she rebuilds elsewhere, Michael countered skeptically. Whatever her motives, the fact remained that Victoria's former showcase home, the command center from which she terrorized our neighborhood, now belonged to me. After discussing it with Sarah, we decided to donate the house to the HOA as a permanent community center and headquarters. The space that had once represented division and control would be transformed into the heart of our community. At the dedication ceremony, standing on the front steps where Victoria had once summoned her allies, I reflected on our extraordinary journey. 3 years ago, I moved my family to Paradise Falls seeking community, I told the assembled neighbors. Instead, we found a regime. Through standing together, we've reclaimed not just our neighborhood, but the very meaning of home. As I looked out at the faces of people who had transformed from frightened strangers to friends and allies, I felt an overwhelming sense of accomplishment. Victoria had tried to ruin me, to ruin all of us, but in the end, her tactics had forged a community stronger than she could have imagined. The neighborhood she once ruled through fear now belonged to all of us in spirit and in deed, and that was a victory far sweeter than revenge. 5 years have passed since we transformed Paradise Falls. Our HOA model has been so successful that neighboring communities have adopted similar reforms. Eleanor has become something of a local celebrity, giving talks about democratic community governance at regional housing conferences. Victoria, I heard, tried to repeat her tactics in her new Florida community, but was quickly exposed. Last I heard, she was living in a non-HOA neighborhood, perhaps the most fitting consequence of all. As for me, I still serve on the board, though we instituted strict term limits to prevent any future concentration of power. My daughters have grown up in a neighborhood where they can have fairy gardens, playhouses, and chalk drawings without fear of violation notices. Sometimes new residents ask about the plaque near our entrance park that reads simply, "Home is not just where you live, but where you belong." They don't know the full story behind those words, and perhaps they never need to. What matters is that we learn the most valuable lesson of all. True community isn't built through rules and penalties, but through respect and collaboration. And sometimes, standing up to a bully doesn't just protect yourself. It can transform an entire neighborhood. The house that once belonged to Victoria, it's now our most beloved community space, hosting everything from children's reading groups to senior yoga classes. The room where she once plotted against homeowners is now our community library. There's a certain poetic justice in that transformation, one that gives me satisfaction every time I walk through those doors. Paradise Falls truly earned its name, not because it's perfect, but because we built it together, and no HOA tyrant will ever take that away from us again.